All right, everybody, we can get started. I'd like to welcome you to the How to Be a Peer Reviewer webinar presented by us at Sage. So first, we'll get started with what to expect for the presentation today. The presentation will be split into two parts. In the first part, we'll hear from two of my colleagues at Sage about how to be an effective peer reviewer, and then walk us through the peer review process from start to finish. This will take about 30 minutes. And will then be followed by a question and answer session. We'll be joined by journal editors who will field your questions about peer review. To prepare for this, please drop your questions in the chat. If there are any that you find particularly important, please like to upvote. We'll run through the questions during this section, beginning with those that have the most upvotes. To begin, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Ying Luo is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Cell Transplantation, a managing editor at Sage. She obtained her PhD in genetics from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, followed by a postdoctoral career in Brookhaven National Laboratory at the U.S. Department of Energy, and later she worked as a project scientist in the University of California, Davis. She started her career as a scientific editor at Molecular Plant. Then she was the executive editor of BMC series journals at Springer Nature. From 2019, she became the deputy editor-in-chief of Cell Regeneration and the editorial advisor of Molecular Horticulture. Lingling Tiang, PhD, is a managing editor too in the open access journals team at Sage Publishing in Shanghai, China. Lingling completed her PhD work at Donghua University in Shanghai and the National University of Singapore. Following 3 years postdoc research at NUS, Lingling worked as a scientific editor at Springer Nature for a portfolio of biology and medicine journals for 4 years. In 2020, Lingling joined Sage Publishing and has been the managing editor of Clinical Medicine Insights Oncology since then. Isabel is an editorial assistant in the UK peer review team at Sage. She assists journals through the submission and peer review processes and works on projects including those focusing on the ethics of peer review. And I'm Sean Scarsbrick, and I'll be moderating the first half of the webinar today. I'm a marketing manager on the author marketing team based out of New York. I'm passionate about helping reviewers, especially those in the early stages of their career, to navigate the peer review process with ease and expertise. And now I'll be passing this off to Lingling.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Sean, for your great introduction. And to start, I'd like to share the definition of the peer review first is from the conversation. Peer review is a process where scientists, peers, evaluate the quality of other scientists' work. By doing this, the goal is to ensure that the work is rigorous, coherent, uses parsed research, and ends to what we already know. So from the definition, we can see that peer review is an integral part of scientific publishing, and it's essential to make sure the quality of the publications is up to the highest standards and ends to what we already know. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are some benefits of reviewing other than the obvious benefits to the individual publications. There are also some benefits to the peer reviewers. So first, peer reviewing is a service to the respective research areas. So by peer reviewing, the reviewers helps to improve the quality of the final research article, as well as offering the authors new insights into their research methods and results, and also giving authors the opinion of experts in the field. And actually, by peer reviewing, it's a very good chance to keep yourself to update with the hot topics in the research areas. Also, it could be a gateway to the future editor's position. And also, there are also additional benefits and the ways in which the reviewers could receive recognitions. For example, the recognitions could be from Web of Science and ORCID, and our reviewers could keep a record of journals for which they have reviewed for, and the recognitions also could be received from the reviewer certificate, and it could be displayed as a professional development in our CV. And at Sage, we offer additional benefits. For example, we offer 25% discount to the Sage books, and also free access of 6 days of our Sage journals to our peer reviewers. So for if you are interested in the details, please refer to our Reviewer Rewards website, which is attached at the bottom of this slide. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. How does peer review work? And I'd like to share the process of the whole peer review and also highlight the role of the peer reviewers in the whole process. So once a paper is submitted, it will be checked for compliance with journal guidelines and whether it fits within the journal's aim and scope. Those checks normally will be conducted by the editors, and once the manuscript passes those initial assessment, it will be sent out for peer review. And peer reviewers normally are matched by their research areas and the keywords associated with their research areas. And the emails will be sent to reviewers. If the reviewer click to accept to the invitation, the manuscript, the paper, that's the paper, will appear in your review center in SageTrank. That's a peer review system for our Sage journals. And by that time, the reviewer will be giving a certain length of time, for example, 14 days to complete the review by providing detailed comments and making a recommendation of accept, revise, and reject decision to the editors. And finally, editors will make an editorial decision based on the reviewer's comments and the recommendation. Yeah. That's the whole peer review process. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are some times when it's best to decline an invitation rather than accept to an invitation. So let's go through these scenarios. The first case, it might be if the reviewer does not have the expertise to review the article. This could happen, for example, the reviewers has changed their research field, or the keywords in their reviewers account hasn't been updated for a while. So in those cases, if the reviewer lack experience in the field, please let the editor know the case. And also, if the reviewer does not have time to review the article and cannot commit to a specific extension, please let the editor know and decline to the invitation as soon as possible. And another case, it might be you initially agreed to review the article, but however, your circumstances change and you cannot fulfill your original agreement. In this case, please inform the journal promptly. Yeah, so they might seek help from other reviewers as soon as possible to avoid any delays on the manuscript handling. And also, if the reviewer has a complete conflict of interest with the research or authors, so competing interests may be personal, financial, intellectual, professional, political, or religious in nature. So examples of competing interest might include, for example, you and the authors are from the same institution or the same university, or you have the authors have co-published for the recent for example, 3 or 5 years, or you have some financial interest associated with the study, or you are working on a very similar research areas and you feel not comfortable in providing an unbiased report. So, but anyway, competing interest could be quite complicated in some cases. So if you are unsure about it, please raise it with the journal and the editor. They will let you know what's the best way to proceed from here. Next, please. Yeah. Reviewer ethics. So the first, let's start with the journal, which is with the double anonymized peer review mode. So for double anonymized journals, authors and reviewers should not know each other. And this kind of peer review will prevent authors from receiving disadvantage or advantages based on their identity, and the reviewers might be more comfortable in providing an unbiased report. But in some cases, for the double anonymized journals, if the reviewer gets to know the author's identity, please let the editor know. This could happen, for example, if the manuscript is not fully anonymized, and also especially if you get to know the author's identity and there is a potential competing interest associated with this, definitely let the editor know. Second is about the study participant anonymity. So that's in cases when, for example, during the review process, you are reviewing a clinical trial and you get to know the study participants, and in this case, please let the editor know as well. Confidentiality. So because for peer reviewing, actually the work and the review is all unpublished work. So the reviewers should not share the content of the unpublished articles. There is one exception to this is when you are doing a joint review, for example, with junior colleagues. But one thing I would like to highlight here is, for example, if you would like to do a joint peer review, please discuss with the journal. First, the decision to allow the joint review is at the journal's discretion. Only start doing the joint review after you have permission from the journal. Recommended reviewers. So at Sage, we do not permit the use of author-suggested reviewers during any stage in submission process. So if you are reviewing, if you received an invitation from Sage journals and you know it's based on author's suggestion, please decline the invitation and let the editor know the reasons. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah, I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Low, for the next part.
Okay, thank you, Ling. Next, we are going to talk about the evaluation criteria a reviewer should keep in mind when reviewing an article. At Sage, the phrase used is research done well to describe the bar for publication. The specifics will vary between fields, but here is how it is explained to journal editors. Sage is looking for discrete, coherent contributions to the academic record that have sufficient methodological rigor to serve as sound building blocks for future research. We'll talk about how to identify research done well in the next few slides. Next slide, please. When a reviewer is evaluating a manuscript, there are some characteristics of the writing and the structure that they may notice immediately, such as whether the author used an academic writing style. For example, whether they wrote in a consistent person and tense that was appropriate for their field, whether they were as specific as possible and avoided generalization, whether they avoided colloquialisms, and whether they avoided regional or discipline-specific jargon. Though the journal is not looking for a reviewer to copy-edit, general comments on language quality are appreciated. This is not a disqualifier for submission, but something the reviewer should note, so we are aware we need a more careful copy editing for it. Some aspects to consider: avoid active voice over passive voice, concise language, simpler sentences construction, correct article use, and singular and plural agreement of verbs and nouns. Again, the review doesn't need to copy edit, but if they encounter enough issues to make the article difficult to read, please let the editor know. It is important to consider whether or not language problems are severe or can be fixed during copy editing. The editor should know if the reviewer is having trouble following the article because it lacks cohesiveness. Some specific concerns might include the organization and overall follow of the manuscript, a balanced use of tools like transitions and parallel construction, clearly stated research questions and findings, and an absence of extraneous material, and correct use of headers. Lastly, the journal expects bias-free, inclusive language that is appropriate for a global audience. Authors should take care when writing about gender, age, disability, neurodiversity, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and region and religion. They should be sensitive to labels and appropriately specific. They should keep in mind that people can have many identities, and one shared identity does not necessarily mean shared experiences. It is worth stating here that the bias-free, inclusive research goes beyond the word choice and extends to the assumptions made by the researchers and the intention and the design of the study. For example, the sampling. If the reviewer has concerns with any of this, it should be noted in the review. Next slide, please. Reporting guidelines exist for many study types and should be followed by authors when preparing an article. The review can ask the editor if they are unsure of whether the journal follows specific reporting guidelines. Not all journals require them. A good resource on reporting guidelines by study type is available on the Equator Network website. Next, a clear contribution to the field. Depending on the journal, it might not be a requirement that all articles make significant or especially novel contributions to the field. However, at a minimum, the journal does expect it to be clear what the contribution of the research is, because it is difficult for future research to build on a study that lacks clear findings and limitations. Next, we expect research to have appropriate ties to the literature. If a reviewer notices material that is missing from the literature review and would give necessary context to the study, let the editor know. For literature review and discussion sections, only suggest your own articles or colleagues' articles if you have legitimate reasons for recommending them, and state this clearly to the authors. Alternatively, you can simply suggest to authors that they need to update the literature with more relevant or more recent articles. It is also good to consider global literature and expanding horizons beyond the existing literature referenced in the article to elevate the discussion or analysis. Lastly, a common critique that a journal appreciates are issues with figure legend. A reviewer should be able to easily read any figures. If the review has trouble, then the author should know to make corrections. Next slide, please. Earlier, we spoke about reviewer ethics. This slide has to do with the ethical guidelines that authors should have followed when performing their study and writing their article. A reviewer should feel free to ask the authors questions in their review and let the journal editor know if they have any concerns with the research ethics of the article they are reviewing. Specifically, feel free to ask for more details on how informed consent was obtained or who gave the ethical approval. If the reviewer has concerns about the privacy of the study participants, please let the journal know. This is especially important for online and open access journals, which can have a wide reach than printed or paywall journals. Lastly, let the editor know if a reviewer suspects any data or image manipulation. For example, a p-value that is too perfect or standard error bars that are too consistent. Reviewers may also have concerns about materials used in the study. For example, contaminated or incorrect cell lines, or perhaps the results seem inconceivable or too good to be true. Any concerns like these should be raised to the editor. Next slide, please. When it comes to looking at the methods and the data analysis, there are a number of key items to focus on. The first is any flaws in the study design. Are there any clear concerns with the way in which the study was conducted? Is the study design consistent with the similar study in the field? Do the results and conclusions seem appropriate given the kind of study conducted? Is the material and methods section descriptive enough so that the study could be reproduced? Are the statistical techniques relevant to the study? Are they the standard for that kind of study? Are the material and methods used for the study appropriate for the research question being addressed? Next slide, please. A lot of questions raised in analyzing the materials and methods section follow over into the results, discussion, and conclusions sections. Common questions to think about when reviewing these sections include: are the results presented in a way that best emphasize the findings? Are these sections free of unsupported generalizations or assumptions? Are the conclusions appropriate for the study? And are there appropriate limitations and directions for future research? Lastly, consider big picture questions. Did the study accomplish what it set out to do? Did they also follow their original hypothesis? Did they follow their own methods? And does this follow through to the stated conclusions? Remember, not all studies yield positive results. They may have none or negative results. Do not recommend to reject a paper because it didn't have positive results. As you can see, there are a lot of things to think about when reviewing an article. By breaking down a review into sections that match the structure of the paper, a reviewer can slowly check all parts of the article and provide thorough feedback for the authors. Next slide, please. Elements of a good review report include: the review is completed in a timely manner, good assessment of the quality of the science, data, and images, is written so that it's easy to read and understand, substantial comments presented in a logical order, provides an overview of paper suitability for publication, specifies edits that are needed, highlights strong points alongside the weak points in the manuscript. If a manuscript is great and looks ready to be accepted, do not just say that in the reviewer report. Include the reasons why the manuscript is good. Focus on what about the methods, results, or the conclusions are good, and what about the overall quality of the manuscript makes it good to accept. Next slide, please. The tone of a review should be helpful, positive, and constructive. Keep in mind that authors may be non-native English speakers. A review should be clear and specific. Avoid using strong punctuation like exclamation points or words in all caps that don't need to be, as this can make a review appear aggressive and intense. Review comments are seen by both editors and authors, so be mindful of word choice and phrasing. To be invited again by an editor, writing a well thought out review goes a long way. Comments to authors can be organized as major and minor comments. Major comments are generally suggestions or questions for the authors that will require additional experiments or a significant amount of rewriting. Minor comments are generally simple questions or suggestions that can be addressed quickly. Keep in mind the question of whether or not the manuscript is readable and is something that can later be fixed with the copy editing. There is also the option to send separate comments to the editor. Take advantage of the separate comments to the editor to give more candid and or high-level feedback. For example, comments around the scope or appropriateness of the study questions. You may be tempted to make a judgment on the scope of a journal, but this is at the discretion of the editor. So please keep this in mind. This type of comment is more appropriate for the editor, not the authors. Next slide, please. Things that should be avoided in a review: lack of details, no justifications of decision recommendation, a recommendation that doesn't match the comments, descriptive with no evaluation of the content, asking authors to cite the reviewer's paper with no justification, negative or aggressive tone. If we see repeated phases of this action by a reviewer, we may take actions and deactivate the account as a reviewer. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ying, so much for so many details on how to do and how to write good peer review reports. So next part, we will move on to how to volunteer to review. Next, please. So there are mainly two ways if one wants to volunteer to review. The first is by creating a reviewer account in the journal's peer review system, the peer review site. And here are a few suggestions for creating the account. So please try to use the institutional email address where possible. And please create ORCID ID and associate the ORCID ID with your account. And please include your affiliation information, specify the degrees, and finally, and very importantly, please add strong keywords to your account. So the keywords should be reflect your research area accurately. They should be descriptive, but not that descriptive. So on the right side of the screen, there are some examples of good keywords and also some keywords to avoid for adding to your reviewer account. And another way to another way volunteer to review is by connecting with the editors directly. So for example, you can write the email to the editors directly to express your interest in becoming a peer reviewer for the journal. I think most of the cases, the emails of the editors is available from the journal's website. And a second way, you can create a Web of Science account, and the editors will find you there and invite you to review the articles from the Web of Science reviewer account. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. joint review. So there are different scenarios when you might want to do a joint reviews. For example, first case, if you are a junior researcher, like a PhD student or early postdoc researcher, you might want to work on the review under the guidance and the supervision of your mentor or supervisor. The second case is if you are a senior researcher and you do not have much time to review, to provide a full review on your own, but want to work with your junior colleagues like a PhD student. So for those cases, you might want to do joint reviews, but please, one thing I want to highlight here is please discuss with the journal and the editor before you start doing the joint reviews, and get the permission from the journal first before you start. And it's also very important, each reviewer should get credit for the work they have done. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah. So we have discussed a lot on the peer review, and for those who are interested in knowing more about peer review and how to write a report, we at Sage, we offer a lot of useful resources. For example, at our Reviewer Gateway website, the how to review articles section, there are various online resources and sorry, PDF guide for you to download. And also there is a how to conduct a peer review video available for you. Also, Sage partners with Web of Science, and we recommend their Web of Science Academy training course. This is linked to in our Reviewer Gateway website. And the Academy is a free of charge formal training course. It provides researchers with the skills, connections, and the experience required to become an expert reviewer. It has learning modules, practical experience, writing reviews, feedback on reviews. And finally, if you completed the training course, a certificate and a badge will be added to your Web of Science reviewer profile. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, and for those who even want to know more about the peer review, and Sage offers additional resources. For example, at our Sage Journal Reviewer Gateway, there are additional videos on how to become a peer reviewer and the peer reviewer ethics video. And you can also get a lot of useful guidelines from the COPE ethical guidelines. That's a Committee of Publication Ethics. And another good way to start as a reviewer is to learn from the actual reports. So for journals with open peer review mode, the reviewers' reports actually are available along with the article, so you can learn from the published report. And also you can check the comments for the preprint articles in various preprint servers. Yeah, next, please. Finally, I would like to thank our reviewers for their support to the fellow researchers. Thank you so much for your efforts in reviewing. Reviewers help protect the integrity of the academic record. Reviewers elevate the quality of the work they review. Reviewers challenge their peers to higher standards of research and scholarly communication. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ying and Lingling, for your presentation. Before we move on to the Q&A, I wanted to flag that at Sage, we have a dedicated gateway that houses all of our peer review resources. So if you have any questions on where to begin, please consult our gateway. And now I'll pass this over to Isabel to begin the Q&A portion of our webinar.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day and that you enjoyed that really interesting presentation from Ying and Lingling. We're going to begin the Q&A session now. I just wanted to remind you to enter any questions you might have for our panelists into the Q&A chat function if you haven't already. If you see a question which someone else has written that you'd really like to be answered today, then please use the upvote function and we will try and get round to it. Any questions which we don't get around to answering during the session, we will send round answers to after the webinar. So please don't worry about that. So I would like to start with a question for Ling Ling, if that's okay. Do you have any tips on how more senior researchers can help introduce early career researchers to the peer review process?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good question. So as senior researchers, I think it's quite important and helpful to get the junior researchers involved in the peer review process and starting their role as reviewers. So I think first, if the senior researcher receive an invitation and you are really interested in but do not have the time to do the full review, I think this time, if you know someone junior but working on a really related areas, get the persons involved in the peer review process and also guide them, give them support through the whole peer review system. That's quite a good training for the junior researchers. But like what we discussed in the presentations, please do get permissions from the editor and the journal before you start doing this kind of joint review, because the decision to allow the joint review is at the journal's discretion. And also there are some cases, if as a senior researcher, if you receive an invitation, that's normally by emails, even you declined, you have the opportunity to suggest a few other names there to the editors. So in these cases, you can suggest your junior colleagues in that invitations. And another scenario, I think another case is, as a senior researcher, you probably are quite familiar with journals in your research areas. So please do recommend those journals to your junior colleagues and encourage them to get in touch with editors directly, like what we just discussed, either by emails or by creating a Web of Science account. I think that's the ways how the senior researchers could get the junior researchers involved in the peer review process. Yes.
Thank you, Ling Ling, that's great. So I have a question for you, Ying, if that's okay. And that is, if a reviewer would like to provide a review, but they don't have that much time, what should they prioritize and what should they avoid?
Good question. So if the reviewer would like to provide a review, probably they don't have enough time, and we will suggest that please contact the journal editor first. Let the journal editor know the situation, and probably she or he will invite new reviewers or offer an extension to the current reviewers. Anyway, this is to avoid any further delay in the manuscript process. So please contact the editor.
Yeah. Thank you. So one of the questions from the Q&A is about what to do when a reviewer is not sure about a particular analytical method or technique used in the paper. If this means that they aren't sure how to interpret findings, what should be done in this case? Ying, is it okay if I go back to you on this one?
Yeah. So if the reviewer is not familiar with a particular data or analytical method or technique used in the paper, means that probably they don't have cannot match to their expertise, please also contact the author or contact the journal editor. Let them know you are not able to assess this part of the this particular part of the content of the manuscript, and the editor may assess this and consider this situation and invite some additional reviews who can assess this part of and contact the editor.
Thank you, that's great. So a question that's come in, Ling Ling, maybe you can answer this one. It's about AI, artificial intelligence. So in the midst of this time where there's lots of queries around AI and how that affects publishing, how do peer reviewers make sure that the manuscript they are reviewing has not used AI generating tools? Is this the role of the peer reviewer, or is this the role of the editor or the publisher? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think that's a very good question. Also, I think it interests a lot of people at this stage as a new tool. ChatGPT just really is changing our lives as well as our, I think, our way of working as editors and reviewers. I think because now it's at the early stages of this this kind of AI tools, I think it really brings a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges to our publication process. And I think as publisher and editors, we are also working on new workflows and also new tools to detect such as AI generated text. And I think at this stage, although editors and the publishers are working to resolve the issues as soon as possible, we do appreciate the efforts from our reviewers if they could if they find any issues around this kind of AI generated text, we would really appreciate if they could flag the issue to the journals. Yeah, and I think AI, yeah, it's a good tool, but I think very important is how do we use it. I think it's a good tool to help us, for example, to improve the language. I think it's quite important and useful for the non-native English speakers. But one thing to bear in mind is that the original idea should be from the authors themselves, and the original idea of the comments should be from the reviewers. Even like reviewers could use AI to help them to organize the language, but the originality should be from the reviewers and authors. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, coming back over to you, Ying. This is a question about how to make the final recommendation as a reviewer. So how would you distinguish between a major revision recommendation or a minor revision, which is required on a paper? Is there any metric that can help determine the peer reviewer to go for one decision or the other? How would you answer that question?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Major revisions usually comments should focus on the larger sections of the paper that will require reviewers to look over again, and such as the methods, analysis, and the conclusions. So it's probably requires the authors to to make additional experiments, provide new evidence, or take some long time that to make the revision. But minor revisions should focus on small language changes or the literature or areas that do not need to be reviewed again. So can take less time for the authors to make the revisions. So this is the difference between the major revision required and the minor revision required. So I would like to say major revision will focus on the experiments, probably some more evidence or additional experiments, but minor revision probably focus on language, some language issues, something.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ling Ling, maybe you've had experience of this yourself. One of our viewers has asked, when does an editor override the decision of a reviewer?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I think as editors invited reviewers to review first, we really respect the comments and the recommendations from the reviewers, but there might be some cases where the editors might make different decisions from the reviewers' recommendations. And I think the cases might include, for example, for manuscript, if we received 2 reports, but anyway, I think the comments or the recommendations is conflicting to each other. For example, one reviewer is recommend to reject and another is reject to accept. In those cases, I think the editors might seek an additional opinion of the reviewer and finally might make a revise or reject decision. So the final decision might be different from one of the reviewers. So that's the first case. And another case here might be as an editor, I also see some cases when the reviewers actually make a recommendation of reject, but I think from their reports, the comments does seem addressable. For example, sometimes the reason to reject is because of poor language and the reviewers cannot really understand, comprehend what does the manuscript talks about, and they make a reject recommendation. In those cases, I think some editors might ask the authors to improve the language and send to review again. So this is another case. So here I also want to make a few suggestions to reviewers. So I think make sure you provide consistent the recommendations between your recommendation of accept, revise, reject, and the actual comments. And another case I can think of for this is maybe because sometimes the reviewers recommend to reject is based on the scope of the work. I think in this case, the editor sometimes may have better knowledge about the scope for the journal. So if for example, the study, the methodology is overall no problem, and the reviewer is just a bit worried about whether the manuscript is right in terms of the scope, so the editor might make a different decision in this case. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a brilliant answer. Ying, I wonder if you could share with us some examples of common errors that you might have seen in newcomers of reviewing. So people who are just reviewing in the early stages.
If for my experience, some newcomers or some junior reviewers, when they are assessing a manuscript, so some examples that the common error examples are like some junior researchers, when they reviewing a paper, usually they will focus on some technical details, focus on very detailed, especially technical details errors in the manuscripts, and ignore the logic of the whole manuscript. So they will focus on something like the some controls or some error bar, something like that. But in most of the cases, probably they didn't check the previous study of the authors or the previous literatures. So this is the one of the case that they focus on too much details and ignore the previous study or literature. And similar, the second one is also sometimes some knowledges or some knowledge or some already know the cases that they, as the junior researcher, they didn't check through the published papers or the relevant literatures in this research field. So we will see that that also probably in the revision point by point responses, they will noted that we already explained this, or in the previous studies, this already be explained or have done by others. So this is the second example. So then the third one is that junior researchers sometimes will, as I mentioned in the first one, we require to the reviewer to evaluate the manuscript or evaluate the study in the current logic of the study, whether it is reasonable and original. But sometimes the junior research will require the authors to do some additional experiments that is out of the current logic or current story of this manuscripts. So, for example, a story they will require to do some more sick experiments or some additional in vivo studies, something like that. But this is as you should check the threshold of the journal and the current story of the journal. Generally, sometimes this additional experiments required by the junior researchers already out of the current story or the structure, the current story of this manuscript. So generally, we'll see that probably you can suggest this in the further study, not the, so this is examples of some newcomers.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think we'll probably have time for one more question each. So Ling Ling, can I ask you quickly, can PhD students be peer reviewers in their field? And also somebody else asked the same question, but about people who already have a master's degree, but no PhD. What's your experience of this?
Yeah, sure. So I think the simple answer is yes. PhD students could be peer reviewers, especially if you have done your work for like 2 or 3 years. You probably have been quite familiar with the research areas and know the details of the research areas. And I think maybe I think the audience who asked this question just lack a little bit confidence to start for their first peer review. And in this case, please do get help from your supervisor and mentor. You might be more comfortable in starting doing your first review report together with the guidance and the support from your supervisors. And I also have a couple of suggestions for those junior researchers like PhD students who want to start their peer reviewer role. First, I think it's a good way to let your supervisor and the mentor know you are willing to do the peer reviews. So I think if they receive a review invitation for a research area quite relevant to yours, they will probably will do a joint review with you, so you can start with that experience. And another suggestions, I think, when you attend academic conferences, there, I think most of the cases, there will be a session about meeting the editors. I think that's a good way to get connected with the editors and let them know you are interested in reviewing for their journals, and also get connected with editors. For example, by directly emailing them or creating your Web of Science account. I'm sure you will start your peer reviewer career very smoothly and naturally. Just to be a little bit more confident. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. And I think our final question that we're going to answer in this session is for you, Ying. So somebody has asked, who's clearly reviewed in the past, I have reviewed some qualitative and quantitative papers which make statements which I'd like to check and verify. But since I don't have access to the data used by the author, I can't make this check. Should I ask for access to the data in such cases? What would they do?
Yes, we would suggest if the data is the accesses to the data is very important for the reviewer to make make an assessment on the manuscript they are reviewing, please go ahead to contact the editor. If contact the editor may contact the author to require the original data or the access to the data, and then forward this to the reviewer. But generally, I would like, I think if this part is very important, most authors will provide this probably in supplementary data as the journal requested to. So please check the supplement data first. Then if there are not any the information there, then contact the author or contact the editor. The editor will will contact the author to provide them.
Great, thank you. That's really good advice. Which brings us to the end of the Q&A. So I think I'm just going to pass back over to Sean just to wrap that up. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Isabel. So I want a big thank you to Ying and Lingling for leading us through the presentation and for answering the questions, and to Isabel for posing the questions to our team. This is a really insightful session. And thank you to everyone who asked questions during the session as well. Just know that we will get in contact with you via email for any questions we haven't answered that we have answers to. So do be on the lookout for that, but give us about a week to respond to you or so. I wanted to flag some other opportunities that we have that may be of interest to you. So at the end of June, on June 21st, we'll be running a How to Get Published webinar, and this will be about how to secure funding. So if you're interested in that, please do check that out. And similarly, we'll be running a seminar about guidance for researchers from lower income countries, which will be information about how to get published, how to get started. I will share links with you later this week as well with that information. And as a quick wrap up, I wanted to let everybody know that I will be circulating the slides and recordings of this presentation, as well as a certificate of attendance for all people who've attended. I wanted to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future at a future webinar. So thank you again, and wishing you all the best. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.